Good morning, everyone. My name is Susan Pond. I'm speaking to you as President of the Royal Society of New South Wales and Chair of the Planning Committee for this year's forum. Welcome to everyone joining us from Australia and even farther afield. I acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of us is living, learning and working today. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today we continue with an outstanding lineup of speakers set to tackle the theme for this year's Royal Society of New South Wales and Learned Academies Forum, Power and Peril of the Digital Age. To recap the highlights from yesterday, day one, and take up the challenges of day two, I hand over to Dr. Ian Oppermann, Chief Data Scientist for the New South Wales Government and Industry Professor at the University of Technology, Sydney. Ian is a thought leader in all things digital and data. He has an MBA from the University of London and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in mobile telecommunications from the University of Sydney. He is a Fellow of the Royal Society of New South Wales, the Academy of Technology and Engineering, and the Institute of Engineers Australia. Ian also serves as President of the Australian Computer Society. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you very much, Susan, and I also acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Gadigal land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you very much for joining us for day two of Power and the Peril of the Digital Age. We spent much of yesterday talking about what the future looks like from the perspective of the metaphor of a child born today. Let's move to the next slide, please. What we talked about from the perspective of health, from security, from education, from societal norms, really spoke to a lot of the concerns related to increased use of data, increased dependence on digital, and not only the benefits that can come, the power that can come from that increased use of data and digital, but also the perils associated with appropriate use of technology, the potential for a digital divide to be created, the potential, of course, for vulnerabilities to be created as a consequence of that dependency. We talked about that child as they go through their lives in a world which is changing, a world where we know that the global population is growing. It's expected to be 8.5 billion people by 2030. It's expected to be 9.5 billion by 2050, expected to be more than 11 billion by the time that child reaches the 22nd century. That population is not only growing, it's also aging. Each and every one of us is living longer, at least statistically. If you live through today, you get an extra couple of hours on your statistical life expectancy. And at a global level, that makes a very substantial difference. It means that not only do we have a growing aging population and the challenges associated with being an older population, it also means that more people will be retired compared to those people who are in the workforce as a proportion. So there's a productivity challenge that this child is also going to face. We know also that the climate is changing, and we know that where we grow food, how we grow food is changing as a consequence of that climate change. We also know that each and every one of us have the expectation of an improved quality of life. So as the world ages and grows and also urbanizes, the constant demand to improve our quality of life creates even further strains on the natural world and also requires increasing use of digital and data in order to deliver those improved quality of life for more people. We also talked briefly about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, a picture of the world in 2030, which describes how we'd like the world to be in terms of smart cities, in terms of quality work, in terms of quality education, reduced disparities between genders, reduced disparities between different people on the planet. But 2030, as mentioned, is only 9 years from now. 2030, our child will only be 9 years old. So pushing beyond 2030 and thinking about the world of 2040, the world of 2050, really starts to challenge people about what the big issues are. Technology itself runs in cycles, and we know that every single major disruptive technology eventually gets domesticated, a great term that was used yesterday by Sue. We also know that how we interact with technologies really start to fundamentally change over time. So the sorts of lessons we learnt from yesterday's session were that we need to stay focused on people at the center. We need to ensure that we're constantly thinking about the human outcomes. We need to constantly think about engaging with technology rather than letting technology just happen to us. Interestingly, whilst privacy, consent, and security associated with data were all part of everybody's conversation yesterday, when asked the question, when will we have addressed the issues? When will we have understood the systems and processes and mitigating factors we need to build around data? Most people yesterday had the view that by 2050, it wouldn't be a problem anymore. We would have harnessed data and its biases and its issues related to quality and the issues related to appropriate use. We would have largely addressed those by 2050, and the conversation would then be much more focused on inclusion and frameworks for appropriate use. But of course, there's a long time between now and 2050, and we know today we do have issues, how to deal with the bias associated with data, how to deal with the issues of appropriate use, how to deal with issues of data quality, how do we deal with issues of context, of provenance of data. All of the things that limit our current use and sharing of data, we'll have solved them by 2050, but we clearly have a lot of work to do before we reach that point. Kathy Foley spoke about science and science plus as a way of thinking about some of those bigger issues. It's important that as we tackle these major challenges of population, of climate change, of the future of work, of the future of tech, of appropriate use, it's important that we think about diverse skill sets bringing to bear to try and address some of these major challenges. It's important for us to think about not just the tech, but the human skills, the people-centered design, all of the other aspects which are necessary for us to address that future environment. It was interesting when we ended the day talking about security, both from a national perspective, but also broadly speaking from a cybersecurity perspective. The issues of real significance had to do with constantly upskilling, constantly relearning, and constantly adopting a secure mindset, and constantly thinking about the role of people in security. So out of the session yesterday, we certainly took some big leaps into the more distant future. 2050 seemed to be about the point that most people felt a level of comfort talking about, but clearly that's still only a couple of decades in the future. But by 2050, there are some really interesting trends starting to be identified around inclusiveness, around a digital divide, around the need to have properly understood and appropriately engaged with technology, which would set us in good stead for the decades after. Today, we're going to hear from a variety of groups specifically trying to address the what do we do about this now? What do we do about these issues that we've identified? Our first panel is a very important group of folks who've got a perspective on a wide range of areas. We have this morning Ed Santo, who's an industry professor at the University of Technology, but also the immediate past Australian Human Rights Commissioner. We have the Honourable Verity Firth, who's Executive Director at the Centre for Social Justice and Inclusion, also at the University of Technology. We've got Mark Fennell, who's a journalist, I think known to many of us, an interviewer and a maker of things. We also have Angus Tran, who's a founder and Chief Executive Officer of Harrison AI, an incredibly innovative firm who uses AI for a wide variety of medical applications. So today, we're going to start to dig into those bigger issues. We're going to explore the what do we do about those challenges which we identified yesterday. And we're also putting out a challenge to the learned academies to start to address those fundamental issues, helping us think our way into that safe space between we should and should not, trying to identify the issues of substance distilled hopefully out of today and yesterday, which we can start to address now, starting to build those frameworks and systems in order to ensure that we are driving towards the future that we want, as opposed to a future that just happens to us. Now, before we fully begin proceedings today, I'd like to just remind everybody that today's event, of course, is brought to us by the Royal Society in conjunction with the 5 Learned Academies and with the support of the Public Sector Network. The event is being recorded for the purposes of sharing information with people who are not attending today. And I'd like to direct your attention to the resources link on your console. So we've included, not only with the agenda, we've included additional reading material that you can access after the event or during the event. And I'll just remind you that all windows on your console are movable and resizable, so you can set up and alter your viewing experience. We would love to hear from you throughout the event. Yesterday was very, very active on the group chat. So if you have questions for our speakers, or if you'd like to pose a question to the panelists during the live session, please feel free to do that using the Q&A tool. And as I said, there's also a group chat where you can connect with other attendees and speakers who are presenting today. So open up the group chat and let everyone know that you're joining us. So today's session really is where we get to work. Yesterday was the fun part of trying to describe what that problem looks like. And